found, frankly, shocking. And then we talked more about the limitations of the technology. We talked about the garbage in, garbage out problem, the fact that these technologies aren't trained on the best information on your topic. They're trained on all the available information on the internet. So for GPT 3.5, it's the internet up until September 2021. Newer versions will be more current, but the training data isn't curated. It's all of the internet, and there's a lot of garbage on the internet. That's the first issue: garbage in, garbage out. And second, we're not talking about any kind of sentience or discernment. The AI doesn't understand your questions or the answers that it gives you, which means that it will be wrong a decent portion of the time, but it will be confidently wrong. It will have no awareness of the fact that it is doing the high-tech equivalent of bullshitting on a test, because it has no awareness of anything at all. So that's the second issue. Even though it's garbage in, garbage out, it won't have any awareness of whether it is right or wrong. And that points us to a right way and a wrong way to use these technologies, particularly when it comes to online business and online courses. The right way to use AI is to do a lot more of what you're already capable of doing, and doing it a lot faster. But you need to treat the AI like an infinitely hardworking and only reasonably competent assistant, which means that you have to give it hyper-specific instructions in the form of quality prompt engineering. And also, you need to always check its work. In other words, you would never ask it to do something that you can't assess the quality of what is produced, which should be simple enough. Except there's more to the story, because there's a giant wrench that gets thrown into the works by a frustrating constant of the human experience, which is that, to quote Gary Vaynerchuk, marketers ruin everything. There is a subset of people who will use it the wrong way, the unethical way, the way of less integrity, and that creates a tragedy of the commons and leads to the spamification of information. And that applies to articles, to ebooks, and yes, also to many online courses. And it means that the value and price of information-only courses is about to go down pretty much to zero. And it leads to a massive erosion of trust, partially because we know that the quality of content coming from a robot just isn't the same, partially because of the intentions of someone who takes the shortcut of publishing and putting their name on that content, and partially because there's just something about it we don't trust. But there is a very real opportunity for people who actually care about creating something real and meaningful and impactful. And yes, getting paid well for doing it. But this opportunity can only work for people who have legitimate expertise, which means that they have meaningful knowledge, discernment, and insight in their fields. Those people, like many of you, are perfectly positioned to create the only kind of course that will see its value and pricing power hold steady and even rise, which is the hybrid course, which combines different elements to create a transformative learning journey. So that's what we covered on Monday. And then on Wednesday, we did a deeper dive into what hybrid means, starting with the fact that it means premium, as in not cheap, as in an amount of money that would get you excited to be paid and that would require a considered commitment on the part of your students. And that does involve a choice because, as we discussed on Monday, not all courses will justify a premium. In fact, most courses are going in the opposite direction, leaving you trapped in that awful catch-22 cycle of not enough sales because I can't afford marketing, because not enough sales because I can't afford marketing, and so on and so forth. With the key to breaking out of that cycle being to create a course that delivers actual transformation by giving people insightful explanations for them to consume through audio or video or text or whatever, that leads to opportunities to apply what they've learned through theoretical exercises or practical work, and then get feedback on what they're doing right and how they need to improve. And we also talked about how to navigate the myriad decisions that this leads to with my proprietary hybrid design Canvas tool that you can use to map out the different components of your course. We also talked about the power of effective prompt engineering, which is essentially about getting better answers by asking better questions. And of course, I also extended an invitation for you to join us inside the AI edition of our hybrid course university that includes 3 full programs: hybrid course launch, hybrid course audience, and hybrid course scale, plus 7 months of one-on-one coaching, plus a guaranteed minimum of $6,000 of course revenue that you will generate, with two really cool bonuses: the library of time-saving AI prompts and promotion to our audience of over 100,000 subscribers to our Two Sigma newsletter. And the investment in this program is, well, it's for you to decide. It's a $500 activation fee, and you choose the rest. It is pay what you can. And the response has been amazing. Many of you have already jumped in. To everyone who has, I want to say welcome. We're super excited to work with you over the next 7 months. And for everyone who is thinking about jumping in or wants more information, I'll tell you more about that later in this session. Right now, let's get into what we're here to actually talk about today, which is the playbook for marketing and selling courses in the age of AI. And as a foundation to that, because I know that there are people here who were not on Monday or Wednesday's session or both, and we're not releasing recording. So what I do want to do is give you a few minutes to share in the chat your most valuable takeaways from the last two sessions. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. One, by reflecting on and articulating what your best takeaway was, it solidifies the learning for you. And it also gives everyone who wasn't there, or maybe was there but missed it, the opportunity to grab that idea. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. Please share in the chat your most valuable takeaways from the last two sessions. All right, awesome. Thank you all for sharing. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. And everyone, whether they were here for the last two sessions or not, you should make a point of saving the chat at the end of this, because there are so many great takeaways there already. There are going to be a lot more. Now, speaking of the chat, while we're at it, I should give you a little bit of guidance on how to use the chat during this training, because we're going to use the chat a lot. I'm going to ask you to drop specific words to show that you're following and to share ideas during assignments. What I'll also ask you all to do is please avoid crosstalk. Avoid, can you please lower the volume or raise the volume or that sort of thing. And avoid side conversations, because there are a lot of people on this call. There are about 1,000 people on this call right now. And it will become very distracting very fast. And when you're at home by yourself in front of your computer, it's easy to forget that every message you send is being broadcasted to 1,000 people. So let's all be disciplined about creating the learning environment that we all want. If that feels fair, drop the word deal into the chat so I know that you get it and you've got the chat working. And on we go. Okay, people get it. It is a deal. All right, so let's get into it, starting with what are realistic financial goals for your course business in the age of AI? And that starts with each and every one of you, because goals are for you to set and then work to achieve. But I can tell you that having now worked with thousands of course creators, when people come to me, they tend to have one of three goals to start. They either want to add an extra $2,000 per month in profit, or they want an extra $100,000 a year in profit, or they want to add $1 million in revenue. I don't know why, but these are the three kind of standard template goals. People will come to me with at least one of those. And each of these is achievable, but depending on where you're starting, it might take longer to make some of that happen. So out of these three options, just put into the chat, tell me, what is your goal right now? What is the goal that you're working towards and you would love to achieve it as your next milestone this year? And I'm seeing a lot of people want the 100K per year. Some people want an extra $5,000 or $10,000 a month, or $2,000 a month. A few people are working towards that million. Awesome. It's all good. Now, whichever of these targets you want to start with, this is where the business math of premium that we talked about on Wednesday really works in our favor. So let's do some calculations, keeping in mind that contribution profit is about 1/3 of your retail price. Given that, and assuming a course price that is premium, so between $500 and $5,000, that makes the contribution profit between $166 and $1,666. So let's be conservative. Let's just say $333. And we'll also assume that 10 or 20% of the people who buy your course will want to upgrade to a more involved service with you for 5 to 10x the price, which is generally how the math works. So let's say you get an extra $10,000 from 1 out of 10 people. So based on that, if you want to earn $2,000 per month in profit, you need a grand total of 1.5 sales per month, which is 18 sales a year. If you want an extra $100,000 in profit, you need an extra, for that $100,000 in profit, you need 6.25 sales a month, which is 75 sales out of the year. If you want to make that $1 million in revenue, that's 41.6 sales a month, 500 sales a year. And the reason I share this math is I want you to see that these numbers are not so big. If looking at this number, this feels doable, put the word doable into the chat. If you're like, yeah, 18 sales a year, that, I can do that, right? 75 sales a year for $100,000. I can do the elbow grease. I can do it. Awesome. All right. So make sure you have your sales target, the number of sales you need per month and per year written down, because that's going to be your North Star, at least until you work out the more precise math for your specific situation, which of course we will help you to do inside of our programs. So now let's talk about how to do it. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is absolutely worthwhile, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. Especially the first time, it is probably going to be tough because of four obstacles that you're going to face to selling your courses. Three of these obstacles are universal, and one of them is new because of AI. So we'll talk about that one in a moment, but let's start with the universal stuff. The first challenge is that, as we all know, practice makes perfect, right? This is a familiar concept. We've all experienced it. The more we practice something, the better we are at it. But the first time you do anything, you haven't had any practice yet, right? You're going to set out to sell your new course for the first time. You will not have any practice because it's the first time. That means you are far from perfect. You are far from the skills that you're going to eventually have. And there's nothing you can do about that but to be compassionate with yourself and accept that it won't be as easy the first time as it will be eventually. So put the word compassion into the chat if you are willing to show yourself that compassion. Say, you know what, it's going to be a little harder the first time, and that's okay. I can accept that. Awesome. Now, showing yourself that compassion is easier when you remember that learning curves are normal. So we're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to give you a few minutes, and I want you to make a list. Share in the chat. Make a list of all the things that you are good at now, but that you weren't good at the first time that you tried. Okay? Make that list in the chat. For reflecting on, there are a lot of things that you are good at now that you weren't good at first. And by the way, I also want to comment, I noticed someone in the chat saying, I don't like this exercise. I don't know if this is for me. That's totally fine. And I want everyone to just know we're at a capacity for this room. We're 1,000 people and there are people trying to get in and not able to. So if anyone is thinking, I don't know if this training is for me, please hop off and make room for people who definitely want to be here. So with that being said, you've made this list of things that you're good at now and weren't good at the first time. And it's important to recognize that everything follows that curve. And that's the first reason why selling your course is going to be hard. It's new and you just haven't had a lot of practice. And the second reason why it's going to be hard is that there is an inevitable credibility gap that you're going to have to overcome. And this has nothing to do with your experience or your expertise or your credentials or your track record or any of those things. It's simply a factor of the reality that if you go to someone, you say, I've got this online course, do you want to sign up? The first two questions that will instinctively come to mind are going to be, well, who has gone through the course before and what have their results been? And regardless of how good you are at what you do and how much of an expert you are, if this is a brand new course, the only answers that you can give are, well, nobody has gone through it before. The results have been nothing because it's brand new. And again, that has nothing to do with your level of expertise or experience. It's just a matter of this being new. And there's another challenge with selling in general, which is the challenge of context. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in different places in the last few days of the bootcamp. But in your mind, everything is clear. Right? People say, what do you teach? You say, this is what my course is about, all clear. But in your prospect's mind, you're coming out of left field. And that is never a recipe for success. You always want people to know that an offer is coming before you make it. And there's a really powerful strategy for addressing a lot of these challenges. I'm going to teach it to you in a minute. But first, let's touch on the fourth challenge with selling your courses that AI has added to the mix. And that is the spamification of information that we talked about that really has led to a lot of low quality courses everywhere. The market is already starting to flood with mediocre information-only courses, which is applying a lot of downward pressure on the prices of those courses and the market's willingness to buy. Now, you might say, wait a minute, Danny, I thought you said we don't have to worry about that because you're teaching us how to create hybrid courses that actually deliver transformation, and that's worth a premium. And that's all true, as long as people know that your course is different from all those other lousy ones. Right? If they don't know, it doesn't matter how good it is on the inside. But I've got you covered, and we'll talk about how to make sure they do know that. But you're going to have to be diligent about it, because if you're not, then it will be an obstacle. That's the bad news. But the good news is that there is a way to not just overcome a lot of these challenges that I've shared, but also to use them to your advantage. This is actually one of my favorite strategies because it's basically like marketing jujitsu that turns an apparent disadvantage, like being smaller and weaker than your opponent, and turns it into a big advantage. And what I'm talking about is seeding demand with a narrative of co-creation. And this is the strategy that has driven probably more sales than any other single thing that I've done and taught. And it is based on some pretty interesting research coming out of Harvard, Yale, and Duke universities. What they did is they had a whole bunch of people come in, the participants, and assemble a bunch of stuff. And one of the things that they were assembling was IKEA furniture. And that's why what they discovered eventually came to be called the IKEA effect. But what they did is they had two groups who were asked to put a price tag on the object that was built. First was the builders. People would come in, they would build the IKEA furniture, they would put a price tag on it. Then they were taken out of the room, and a whole new group of people came in that had nothing to do with this stuff, and they were asked to put a price tag on this as well. These were the evaluators. So what was the finding of this research? Well, what they found is that people were willing to pay more for the pieces that they built themselves. They did a version of this research. I found this fascinating, where they had people come in and they're building this IKEA furniture, and they're normal people like me, like you. We've all, I think, put the word IKEA into the chat if you've ever built IKEA furniture, right? I think it's kind of like a rite of passage we all go through. So, if you're anything like me, you have IKEA furniture in your house, you built it up, it's all good, and you did a good job, but it's not perfect, right? This piece is screwed in a little too tight, that piece is a tiny bit crooked, etc. That's how it was for the builders. But then they put the price tag in there, they took them out, and then they had other people come and build the IKEA furniture, and these were professional IKEA builders. It's their job to build IKEA furniture. When they do it, it's always perfect. And so they asked the people to put price tags on all this stuff, and they found that people were willing to spend more money for the imperfect pieces they built themselves than for the perfect pieces that somebody else built. Because when we are involved in creating something, we value it more. I'm going to say to everyone who's chatting again and again about the transcripts, please stop doing that. It's distracting to everyone. If we keep saying that, we're going to have to remove you from the session. People were willing to spend more on the imperfect pieces that they built themselves. This is called, the technical term is the endowment effect. So our goal is to leverage the IKEA effect by engaging your students as co-creators of your hybrid course. And this turns the lack of a proven track record from a bug to a feature. And what it also does is seed demand, right? When you have those initial conversations, figuring out what people want and what their interests are, their need comes front and center in their awareness. And they also know that you are actively working on the problem. Now, I want to address for a moment the question of market research and how it all fits into this. And the answer is that you get those market research insights through the seeding process. But I don't want you to think of it as market research, because that evokes the image of slowly taking your time, poring over data and spreadsheets. But a core part of what we're doing with the seeding process is creating that context of awareness about your offer. And that context doesn't last forever, right? And today it lasts a lot less time than it used to. There's a ton of data out there showing that our ability to pay attention to things over time is declining. And stats about attention spans are usually oversimplified. They're usually misleading. If you want a more detailed account, a great book about this is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It's a great book. But in the absence of having read the book, just take my word for it, our attention spans are declining. Our ability to pay attention is shrinking. And this is a trend that AI is accelerating because it contributes to the flooding of information coming at us all the time. And the upshot of all that is that you have to do the seeding quickly. If it takes months, then by the time you circle back around, the context is gone. They've forgotten who you are, and you're back at square one. So put the word quickly into the chat. If you understand, this has to happen quickly. It has to happen like a sprint where you do all the seeding, you gather your feedback, you come back, you say, hey, I've got something for you. Amazing. Okay, you guys get it. And by the way, this is exactly what Happy Leopold did, moving fast from market seeding to a pilot. And that took him literally from a few tens of thousands of dollars in his first pilot to seven figures in his third year. So let's talk about how you can do the same thing. There are 4 strategies that I teach for seeding the market with desire, with demand, and then selling your pilot course. The first is the pre-sale email campaign. The second is enlisting partner support. The third is free coaching calls. And the fourth is personal network outreach. Now, why am I teaching you 4 strategies instead of just one? Right? Why don't I just teach you the one strategy that everyone should do? The answer is that there are 1,000 people on this call right now. You all have different contexts, different situations, different strengths, different resources. I don't have one strategy that will work for all 1,000 of you. But I can say with confidence that between these 4 strategies, almost everyone on this call will have one that works for you. So I will teach you all 4, and I promise at least one of them will be a fit for you and your situation. But here's the deal. I want you to promise me you're not going to listen for 2 minutes and be like, oh, I think this one's not for me, and then tune out and go play Candy Crush. You've got to pay full attention to all 4 because the better you understand each of them, the more it'll help you understand the rest. They all work on the same underlying logic. So if that feels fair, put the word deal into the chat. I promise at least one will work. You promise to pay attention to all 4. Awesome. We have a deal. Okay. So I'm going to share all 4 with you. I'll teach you exactly how they work. And before we jump into the specifics, I do want to make one comment about selling courses into companies, B2B. I often get asked, what's the difference, right? I'm selling B2B. How is it different? And the short answer is that yes, there are some differences, but they're not as big as you might think. So yes, the strategies I'm going to share do need to be modified a bit to work in B2B. We teach about that inside the Hybrid Course University. But fundamentally, the strategies I'm going to share right now, they all work in that setting as well. So let's jump in, starting with the pre-sale email campaign. And basically, this is the archetypal strategy for launching a pilot program to your audience. So here are the steps. First, you float the idea to see if people are interested. You say, hey guys, I'm thinking about creating a course on this topic. Might you be interested in that? Then, presuming they say, yeah, we're interested, you send a second message. You say, all right, I want some specific input as to what to include, right? If I do this course, what's one thing you definitely want me to cover? Then you announce you're going to do it. I've reviewed all the survey results. People are interested. I'm going to do this. You give them a sneak preview of what's coming. You start enrolling students so they can sign up. They can pay you. You then answer questions. You reinforce benefits. And finally, you say it's the last chance to sign up because the class starts tomorrow. Now, I hope you're recognizing here that there's a logical progression. So you only go through these steps if people are legitimately interested. If you float the idea, you say, hey, I wonder who's interested in this, and the answer is nobody, don't just blindly continue through the steps. Take the feedback and adjust your plans accordingly. And an important key is that you should be dropping hints about what your program is going to look like, especially the hybrid elements, so they don't dismiss it out of hand as just another information-only course, like the kind that ChatGPT can create. So let's see what a campaign like this would actually look like on a calendar. So here's what could be a real calendar for a real month. Let's say you're going to skip the first week. That's when you're creating all your marketing emails. So the second, you float the idea. You send an email, I'm thinking creating this. You did Friday, people seem interested. Here's a please questions. Let me know what you want. Then review on the weekend. It's looking good. I'm going to do it. 2 days later, you say, here's a sneak preview. Here's what I'm going to include in the course. And 2 days later, you say, all right, guys, the doors are open. You can sign up. Pay right here. Reserve your spot. The next day, you answer their frequently asked questions. Wait a couple of days, reinforce the benefits. And then on Tuesday, you say, hey, guys, it's the last chance to sign up because the first day of class is tomorrow. And you can adjust the dates a little bit. But with some variation, this is basically every pre-launch campaign you've ever seen. And if copywriting isn't your strength, AI can help you write these emails, just as long as you give it really specific instructions. You tell it what you want the email to be about and what you want the call to action to be. And sorry, can you guys hear me? I think I got muted by accident. Can I get a thumbs up? You can hear me. Okay. So you tell ChatGPT what you want the email to be about, what you want the call to action to be, what tone you want for the voice, etc. Right? You just give all those details. You go back to the idea we talked about on Wednesday of giving the AI hyper-specific instructions. So let's actually practice that. I'm going to give you a few minutes to write a prompt, put your prompt into the chat, and just share what is a prompt that could get ChatGPT to write an email in a marketing sequence like the one we just outlined. All right, awesome. Great suggestions in the chat. So we've got our first strategy, the pre-sale email campaign. Now, obviously, as several of you have pointed out in the chat, this strategy requires a few thousand email subscribers at the very least. So what if you don't have them? Well, then you just move on to strategy number 2, which is enlisting partner support. And the idea here is that if you don't have an audience, you can leverage somebody else's audience. And the first step towards doing that is a warm relationship with an influencer. And always when I say that, people are like, well, I don't have any warm relationships with influencers. And so I have to define what we're talking about. When I say a warm relationship, I don't mean that, you grew up across the street from them and you barbecued every weekend in the summer, every year as kids together and all that kind of stuff. All I mean is that you've had some interaction with them and it was positive, right? So that when they see your name, they will recognize it and the association will be positive. So it could be that you've interacted with them by email or on Facebook or on Twitter or in a comment on their blog or at a networking event, or you bought one of their programs and you implemented it and got a result, or you interviewed them on a podcast. All of that qualifies. And usually when I give people that kind of criteria and they think about it for a bit, they're like, oh yeah, actually, I'm connected to quite a few influencers in my industry. So now let me tell you how to reach out and approach them. You're going to start with a line like this. And there's no subject line, by the way, because you're going to reply to whatever your last interaction with them was. Say, thanks again for, and fill in the blank, remind them why they like you, essentially. You say, I'm writing because I'm gearing up to try something new that I think your audience would really appreciate. It's a new course that I'm planning about, and here you put in your instant credibility formula, which is something that we teach you how to put together inside the Hybrid Course University, but it's essentially a 1 or 2 line overview of what you're doing. And you say, I've already had great responses from people about the idea, which presumably you have, and I'm looking for a small number of pilot students to try it out, either at a significant discount with special level of support, whatever the case may be. And you say, with your permission and blessing, I'd love to give your community first dibs on these spots. What do you think? Would this interest you at all? And if you have a reasonably warm relationship and they have a reasonably sized audience, this should not be so hard. And all you're really asking them to do is send 1 or 2 emails. And it actually simplifies this marketing campaign we mapped out earlier. You kind of get to cross off the whole first half of it. They're going to send an email straight to the place where they can buy it, except they go to a landing page. People can opt in to get the details so you can follow up with them later. And then after that, they get to the sales page. Maybe you'll push your frequently asked questions email by a day or so, and then you go straight to the rest of the offer presentation. So any number of influencers could mail to this. And by the way, those of you who have already joined us inside the Hybrid Course University, or those of you who are planning to do it by the early bird deadline to claim the bonus of promotion to the 100,000 plus subscribers on the 2 Sigma newsletter, well, you could use that promotion to feed into a strategy like this one. So that's our second strategy. Now let's move on to the third one, which is the free coaching calls strategy. And the idea here is that you use free coaching calls to build interest and lead to your pilot. No big audience needed. And because you're doing this with free coaching calls, this is also a really good strategy to jumpstart a coaching business. Now, this strategy was implemented masterfully by my friend Lou Dallow. And there's a detailed case study of exactly what he did inside of our programs. But let me share with you the results at a high level. So on a timeline, for the first 2 months, while the first 2 months were going on, he generated $37,500 in coaching revenues. Then at the 2-month mark, he generated $30,000 launching his pilot course and making sales. Then he buckled down, he delivered a great pilot, he learned from it, he got ready to launch his full course. At the 9-month mark, he launched the full course, made $100,000 in course sales and $250,000 in coaching revenues. And that was followed, of course, by a lot more in the lifetime value of the customer. Now, I want to be clear. Your mileage not just may vary, it will vary. This was a masterfully successful implementation. Your results will not be as good. But even if you just do a fraction of this, even if you just get 10%, wouldn't that be amazing? Put 10% into the chat if you would be thrilled with just 10% of Lou's results your first time out of the gate. Yeah, that's what I typically see. People are like, yeah, 10%, I would be very happy. And here's the thing. Lou's result is exceptional, but it's not actually that unusual when you consider the entire life cycle of online courses. And in case you're wondering, Lou only had about 350 active subscribers when he did this. So if you have a few hundred people on your email list or a few hundred connections on LinkedIn, you can totally do this. So let's talk about how. We're going to go through the steps one by one. And it all starts with the gift of free coaching calls. And you've really got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. Lou did about 150 of these calls in 3 weeks. And AI can help you do it even more effectively because you can point it to things like your prospect's LinkedIn and social profiles and ask it to write you a summary of key things to be aware of, right? The trick is just to have really good prompts that will give the AI the instructions that will return a really useful summary for you. And doing this will do a couple of things. It'll give you a real in-depth sense of what people want to pay to learn from you. And it will engage with your best prospects so they listen when you offer the pilot. Now, let's be real for a moment, right? Most of the people who are attracted to my work, they have a work ethic. Put the word work ethic into the chat. If you're like, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves, I'm willing to do the work, I have a work ethic. If that's what it takes, I will do it. Awesome. I see a lot of people with a work ethic. You're willing to roll up your sleeves. And yeah, doing 150 calls in 3 weeks, it'll be tiring, it'll be tedious, but if you've got some work ethic, some elbow grease, totally doable. The hard part isn't doing 150 calls. It's getting 150 people to agree to get on a call with you in the first place. That's the hard part. So let's talk about how to do that. Here's a template for the outreach. And I'm going to give this to you. It can be, you can reach out to people by email, text message, social media, whatever. But here's the gist of the messaging. You're going to say, I want to give back and better understand what people are struggling with the most. Can I offer you a free 20-minute laser coaching call about fill in the blank, the outcome that you're promising? And I promise not to try to sell you anything on the call. Now, there is a key to making this work, to making this really effective, and it is in the outcome that you're promising. It's got to be super compelling. It's also got to be specific and focused, so not general or vague. It's got to be believable for the 20-minute time frame. And it's got to be something they feel is personalized. So they don't say, just send me the information. They have to feel like they actually have to talk to you and you're going to give them something personalized. And this is another one of those things that can be really hard to do, A, because there's really an art to it, and B, because you're so close to it. This is something that my coaches work very closely with our students in order to make sure they're doing right, because executing this properly is the whole difference between success and just not so successful. But in the absence of a qualified coach, AI can be a really good brainstorming partner. So here's a really simple version of what a prompt might look like. You might say something like, I'm an expert in X. What could I help someone figure out in 20 minutes? But that is a very simple prompt. We can make it a whole lot better. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. I want you to think about how would you improve that prompt? How would you give the AI better instructions to better help you come up with a compelling outcome that you can promise to people? I'm going to give you a few minutes to explore that right now. right. Awesome. So remember, the point of doing this is that you want something compelling enough that people will want to get on a call with you. And doing this accomplishes two things. First, you will learn what your market is looking for, and this will set you up to launch your pilot course. And this is an area where it is really powerful to leverage AI for two reasons. First, you are quickly going to find yourself drowning in your market research data. Let's say, for example, that you conduct just 60 market research interviews and you're very disciplined. They really stick to 20 minutes each. They don't run over. Well, human speech averages about 100 to 200 words per minute. So you're going to be looking at a total of between 120 and 240,000 words. Right? That's the same as 3 to 6 nonfiction books. That's a ton of work to review, never mind to carefully parse for insights. But that's the sort of thing that ChatGPT is great at. And you don't have the garbage in, garbage out problem that you would have if you asked ChatGPT a question in general, because it wouldn't be answering based on the entire internet. It would only be answering based on the data that you are telling it to review. And you know that is quality data. Now, there's just one little problem with that, which is the little message box that you drop your prompts into. How are you going to fit hundreds of thousands of words in there? Now, there are different ways that you can approach this. You can do it by accessing enterprise-level versions of ChatGPT, like their GPT Playground, or by writing code that calls their API. But there's also a hack to getting around all that, which is to just put all of your research into a publicly accessible Google Doc. Then your prompts can read something like this. Read the document at this URL, and then tell me whatever it is you wanted to tell me. And by doing this, you will learn a lot about what your market wants from your course and also more broadly. Now, since we're talking about using AI for market research, there's another powerful prompt engineering approach that I want to share with you, which is role definition. Because remember, the AI is looking for the statistically most likely right answer. And what you're doing with careful prompt engineering is refining the parameters of what that answer should look like. And a powerful way to do that is by telling ChatGPT what role it should be playing. So for example, you might start your prompt by telling it, you are a market research, or you are a heart-centered entrepreneur, or you are a stressed out professional, or you are a buyer of fill in the blank. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool into the chat if you're like, that is really cool that you can tell it to do that and it will. Awesome. So let's stretch our imaginations a little bit. I'm going to give you a few minutes, and I want you to think about and share in the chat, what are some roles that you can ask ChatGPT to act as part of your prompts? All right, awesome. Great ideas in the chat. Now, before we move on from the topic of AI, there's one more thing that I want to cover, and that is the human dimension. Because while the technology is advancing at breakneck speed, our programming is the same as it's been for thousands of years, and our brains just aren't wired to know what artificial intelligence is. And that's why we anthropomorphize. Our instinct is to explain our thinking. We say please and thank you to Alexa. And this may seem like a silly artifact of the reality that we just aren't used to ChatGPT or to AI yet, but that's not actually what it is. What it actually comes down to is that we have to make a conscious decision about how we want to keep interacting with others. If you are curt and callous with AI, you're going to find that you are acting that way with the people in your life as well. So my advice is to take a page from J.M. Barrie's book, The Little White Bird, and always be a little kinder than necessary. The AI does not care, but you should. These tools are powerful, so use them, but don't let them disconnect you from your own humanity. Put the word kind into the chat if you get it. If you're like, this is not about the AI and making the AI feel good. This is about how you want to train yourself to treat other people. Okay, beautiful. Now, getting back to our seeding strategy of free coaching calls, it will help you learn what your market is looking for. But as a bonus, you will also find that you end up selling more coaching services. Now, you might be thinking, some of you might be like, wait a minute, Danny, didn't I say I was going to promise not to sell anything? And the answer is yes, you did. But if you do a good job on that 20-minute call, some of them are going to ask, they're going to say, how else can you help me? So you just say, well, I promised not to sell you anything on this call, and I want to honor that, but we can set up another call to discuss. That's all it takes. That's how Lou generated $37,500 in coaching revenues before he even launched his pilot. Then, after the calls, you will be ready and eager to present your course because they will be ready and eager to hear from you. So that's when you offer your pilot. And that's how Lou made $30,000 selling his course to all these people who were eager and waiting to hear from him. Then you deliver your pilot, gather feedback, and launch your full-scale course offer. And that's what leads to all the launch revenues and everything that follows. So that's the third strategy. Finally, we've got one more, which is the fourth strategy. It is personal network outreach. And the idea here is to just keep it really simple and reach out to your contacts to see if they're interested in your pilot. And it's important to have this strategy in your back pocket because even if you don't have a list in air quotes or audience, you're still connected to people who could be interested through your phone and email contacts, through Facebook and LinkedIn connections, through social groups and clubs, through professional associations. Now, you can and should reach out to them, and it's pretty easy to do. But I'm going to do a little bit of preemptive mind reading. I know there's some people on this call right now who are thinking, but Danny, I don't want to call everyone that I know to sell them something. That feels super icky. Put the word icky into the chat if you're like, yeah, that feels super, super icky. I don't want to call everyone I know to try to sell them something. So here's my response to that. I would say that, yeah, it is really icky. I don't want you to do that at all. People are all going to think you joined some MLM scheme. Do not do that. The only people I want you to call are the people who might legitimately want what you're offering based on what you know about them. And just present the idea, right? Just say, hey, I'm thinking about creating a course about this topic. What do you think? Is that something you might be interested in? That's all, right? That's all you've got to say. And they can say one of two things. They can't say, yes, I'm interested, right? You've told them like two sentences. You haven't told them enough to say yes. But they could say no. They could say, I'm not interested. So you say, okay, no problem. Can you tell me why not? And you make it clear. You're not trying to convince them, right? I just want the feedback because I'm thinking about doing this. And if it's not a good idea, then, I'd rather know that now. So they could say no and you get some feedback. Or they could say maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe tell me more. And so if they've asked you to tell them more, then you do. You tell them what the course is going to cover and what the outcomes are going to be and how long it's going to run and how many people you're going to let in, what it's going to cost eventually and what the pilot's going to cost now and all that kind of stuff. And then you say, now that you know all this, do you want a spot? And they could say no, in which case you ask for feedback. They could say yes, in which case you say, that's fantastic, and you take their payment. Or they could say some version of maybe, I don't know, I need to think about it, I need to talk to my spouse. You say, no problem, can you give me an answer by Monday? And that leads to a yes or a no. And this is it, right? And you'll have to make a couple dozen calls, but they're easy and low-key calls. And if you're onto a good idea, this approach alone is enough to fill your pilot in just a couple of weeks. So we've gone over 4 strategies for seeding. There's the pre-sale email campaign, there is enlisting partner support, there is free coaching calls, and there's personal network outreach. Now, I want to ask all of you, drop into the chat, let me know which of these strategies feels like the best fit for you. I'm going to take a sip of my drink while you're typing. Which of these feels like the best fit for you? So I'm seeing it kind of runs the gamut, 1, 3, 4, 2, but 3 is the favorite, which is usually the case when I teach this. 3 is always very popular. Awesome. But again, the reason I share all 4 of them is that at least one should be a fit for everyone here. Now, there is a lot that is great about launching your pilot course in this way. You will validate market demand, you'll get paid to develop your course, but the biggest long-term benefit is that the next time when you go to launch your course and people ask you, well, who has gone through the course and what have their results been? You can respond with, well, check out all our successful customers. And it's really powerful to be able to share success stories. Like, I'm sure some of you who are thinking about joining the hybrid course university would be interested to know about my past students. Like, maybe you're in a kind of esoteric field. You might be interested to know about Chris Arning. Chris is a semiotics consultant and community leader in the semiotics field. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their interpretation. So the character from the Da Vinci Code, who's a professor of symbology, he would have been a semiotics professional. So Chris works with media companies to help them with their semiotics messaging. He came to us, and with his first pilot and then his first launch, he brought in $30,000 in course revenues. I might tell you about Corey Melanson. She describes herself as a process facilitator. She's also an instructional designer and curriculum developer. Between her first pilot and her first launch, she brought in $16,000, and then she started running courses again and again, and it led to $175,000 in course revenues in her first year. I might tell you about Deborah Cady. She created a certification program for supportive adult allies of youth and young adults with mental health challenges. In her first year, she launched 2 pilot courses, followed by 2 full launches. In aggregate, she made $145,000. And for all of these people, the pilot was just the first step on the way to a much larger hybrid course empire. Now, there is one question that might come up as you go about selling your premium hybrid course, which is, because it's a premium course, premium price, how do you handle price resistance? Right? This is a huge challenge for a lot of course creators, especially when they're not yet super comfortable with selling. But the good news is that if you know how to handle it, it's really no big deal. And I'm going to teach you how to handle it. I'm going to come back to that right before we get to the Q&A. But before we do that, for right now, it is time for another one of those off-ramps that I promised you on Monday. And since this is our last session in the bootcamp, this is the last off-ramp. This is where you decide either, all right, I'm doing this. I'm going the hybrid route. I'm using AI. Put the word hybrid into the chat if you're like, I'm doing this. I'm launching my hybrid course. I'm using AI. I'm creating a product that's going to make a difference for other people. It's going to change the direction of my business. And if the answer is no, the answer is no. That's totally fine too.